So, 1 Samuel chapter 25, 2 through 17, starting in verse 1. Then Samuel died, and all Israel gathered together and lamented for him, and buried him at his house in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. Now there was a man in Maon, whose work was in Carmel, and the man was very great. And he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And it happened while he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. And the woman was good in insight and beautiful in appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. That David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel, come to Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus you shall say, have a long life. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. So now I have heard that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we have not dishonored them, nor have they missed anything all the days they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we have come on a festive day. Please give whatever you find at hand to your servants and to your son to David." Then David's young men came and spoke to Nabal according to all these words in David's name. Then they waited. But Nabal answered David's servants and said, "Who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men whose origin I do not know?" So David's young men went back on their way and returned, and they came and told him according to all these words. Then David said to his men, "Each of you gird on his sword." So each man girded on his sword, and David also girded on his sword. And about 400 men went up behind David, and 200 stayed with the baggage. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, "Behold, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he rushed at them angrily. Yet the men were very good to us, and we were not dishonored, nor did we miss anything as long as we went about with them while we were in the field. They were a wall to us both by night and by day, all the time we were with them shepherding the sheep. So now know and see what you should do, for evil is decided against our master and against all his household, and he is such a vile man that no one can speak to him." May the Lord bless the reading of his word. You may be seated. Beginning once again in verses 2 and 4, or through 4, we read, "Now there was a man in Maon whose work was in Carmel, and the man was very great, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And it happened while he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail, and the woman was good in insight and beautiful in appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. That David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep." So, we have a lot here of typology, don't we? We've got a lot of Saul as Esau and Isaac in the previous chapter. And so we have Saul, in a sense, as the Esau chasing David, the Jacob, out. And he comes to a fella named Nabal. Now, this is very fun in English. Now, it exists in part in Hebrew, but not quite as nicely as it does in English. But you will note that Nabal, in our English, is the exact reverse of Laban. This character is a Laban character. He is going to hit just about every single same beat that Laban had with Jacob. We have sheep. We have an agreement between them, in a sense, not necessarily between the master, but definitely between the sheep shearers, as we see at the end of our passage this morning, of some kind of compensation, the lack thereof, and the rest of the story will continue it. We will note, however, and I'll say it here at the forefront, that we would expect the story then, and this is how Bible stories tend to go. They begin in this sort of seed form, where they're not that complicated. It's very easy to understand. And then the same story is recapitulated, but it gets more complicated each time, right? Genesis is a perfect example of this. Genesis is the retelling of the garden about 5 times over, but it gets more complicated each time. Right? The first time, it's only a couple chapters. It's about 3 chapters. By the time you're getting to Abraham, it's a lot of chapters. By the time you're at Jacob, it's almost over half the book. Right? It's a lot. Well, the shift here is that we expect David to continue being the Jacob character. He does not. About halfway through this passage, actually, we see it in this passage, he turns into Esau. Right? Esau is actually in the story with Laban and Jacob, right? He's who Jacob meets after escaping Laban. So, we'll see that play out. I just want that here ahead understood. So Saul is the Esau chasing the Jacob out. He's also the Pharaoh character. We saw that earlier, right? When the gods of Pharaoh are embarrassed in the same way that Saul's family gods are embarrassed. When Michael, his daughter, hides the teraphim, that's the household gods. And so he's been very much like a Pharaoh character, pushing out into the wilderness. Well, we have our character named Nabal, but I want us to note how the Bible immediately presents Nabal to us. God bless you. In the first, he is a man who is concerned about his work. Right? We don't get his name until verse 3, right? I mean, yeah, there's only 2 verses there. But still, the point is there's a lot of words in between. We find out about all of his possessions, where he works, where he lives, before we even hear his name. There's a reason for that, because this man is a fool. That is what Nabal means. Fool. He is a fool, and he is a fool because he is covetous. He is a jealous, covetous, greedy man. His possessions are mentioned before his person. Now, I said we would cover it just a little bit here, as we covered it a little bit last week, so we get the fullness here of 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 1, in which Samuel dies. And I'll just make this point, because it is important, that when the highest religious leader in Israel died, something happened. Their death, symbolically, their blood, makes the land clean and presents them, makes it able for everyone in Israel to begin a form of conquest, some kind, whether it's personal, familial, or in the larger context, national, right? So, for example, until Aaron's death, Israel, but once Aaron dies, they can begin defeating their enemies. The same thing happens with Eleazar. Eleazar's death is the final words, I'll read it to you, the final words of the book of Joshua are the death of Eleazar. The reason Joshua ends there is not because, that's just the last historical note the author wanted to tell, because it's not even chronologically. It's because, right, at the Battle of Ai, not artificial intelligence, that's the name of the city. What's the fall in the book of Judges? Well, they're conquering Canaan, and then what? Oh, those guys got some pretty scary horses with wheels. All right, we're not going to fight them anymore. That's the fall, right? They don't complete the conquest. And what's the result? They have to live with these Canaanites, these Jebusites, and so on and so forth, and they take on their gods, and on it goes. These are the final words of the book of Joshua. And Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died, and they buried him at Gibeah of Phinehas, his son, which was given him in the hill country of Ephraim. That's the final words of the book of Joshua. What's the continuation? The fight against Canaan in the book of Judges. So, the death of the high priest reestablishes the garden, followed by a new fall. We see that presently here in our story, don't we? What is the garden? The garden is Carmel. What does Carmel mean? Rich garden place, okay? So we have our setting. What is Nabal described as? We don't see it as much here, though you can begin to see it. It's implied. But it's explicit later in the passage that he eats like a king. So here we have our king character, our almost priest-like character. And we also, as I mentioned last week, we have at the from 24 through 26, so this chapter included, the terms good and evil used the most amount in the book of Samuel. And remember, that's both 1 and 2 when I say that. Both 1 and 2 Samuel. This is also going to be the place. Did anyone know where else Carmel is famous for? It's the place where Elijah is going to fight off the prophets of Baal, right? So it's going to have a very prominent place in the book of Kings, pretty much at the climax of the first book of it. So that's worthwhile considering. This rich land is where we are at. And so we have a rich fool. This man is rich. We see it. He has 3,000 sheep, 1,000 goats. Very similar to Job's account of what he has, except we don't have camels here, so he's not quite like a Job. But he is very rich. He has about the same amount of sheep. He's a very rich man. And yet he is foolish. Or maybe we put it this way. He's foolish, yet wealthy. Can you count on your hand? I can't count on my hand because there's too many. How many people try to suggest that wealth is necessarily gained through some kind of, often it's a Gnostic knowledge. If you really know, you have to buy my, CD. They probably don't do that anymore, but you have to buy my program, and that's how you'll learn how to trade stocks and this, that, and the other things. All these wisdom things, right? Or you can even have it with among Christians, right? Christians say the only way to become wealthy is through wisdom, and the only way, and I've heard this explicitly. I'll try to say it correctly, but this was said to me one time, that the only way that the unbeliever can become wealthy is by, though they do not know it, engaging in kingdom economics. So they employ the book of Proverbs whether they know it. Nabal would have to have a phone call with them. Nabal is not engaged in any kind of wisdom. Nabal is a fool, and yet he is wealthy. Now, in part, this could be generational wealth that's passed down, but nevertheless, he has maintained it, right? He isn't squandering it. He has 3,000 sheep. He has 1,000 goats. That's not a small thing, especially when in Canaan, wool is one of their greatest commodities. He is a very, very rich man, and yet he is a fool. Why is that? Why is that? Because God permits the fool. He lets the rain fall upon both the wicked and the righteous. He permits it. But for what ends? For what ends? Now, we understand that he is a good father to all his creations, so that's why he lets it rain on one and the other, on both. But we might also consider that is in speaking of provision, not of wealth, not of the growth of wealth. We're told explicitly in Proverbs, we're told why riches are given to the foolish. They are given for the inheritance of the righteous. David will inherit this wealth. We won't see that in this passage this morning, but we'll see it eventually. He inherits this wealth. Sometimes we're so concerned, and let me bring this outside of just dollar signs, because I hope we don't think of just dollar signs when we think of wealth. But let us also think of things like the internet, or what is a misnomer, artificial intelligence. It's better called LLMs, large language models. Those things, they all scare us, don't they? All these things that the wicked get their hands on, and they grow huge, wealthy empires on. Guess what God promises? That's not for them. They build it for you, but it's not for them. It's for you. You inherit the earth. They don't. They go the way of the chaff. They go the way of the wind. They disappear. But we last. Our children remain. Our seed continue on. And if you don't believe that, you can just look with your own eyes at the practicality of it. Christians have children. Christians love their children. Christians keep their children. Pagans kill their children. Pagans murder their children. Pagans refuse to have children. They don't inherit this earth. Just by practical means, they don't. And then God will also wipe them away. We'll read about that a little in a moment here. Lastly, on that point of his richness, he is also, we should make a comparison note to Saul. It's within a span of one chapter, so we should take note of it. The number, 3,000 sheep, is matched with Saul's 3,000 men that came out to take David. Well, he is called a Calebite, and that should be to his credit, right? Because I mentioned the book of Judges. Who's Caleb? Caleb is one of those great heroes of the faith. Unfortunately, we don't know him too much, do we? What do we know him for? Primarily, we know him for as one of the two faithful spies, right? Maybe not. Maybe you don't know him for that reason. But that's one of the major reasons he's known. He comes back with Joshua. He's a faithful spy. He says, yes, let's go take that land. But he's known for a second thing, and it's actually related to his spying. Because he brings back a good report. He doesn't bring back a bad report. He brings a good report, and he knows there's giants in the land. But then God says, because of this bad report, what? They're going to be wandering in the desert for 40 years. So what is Caleb thinking about for 40 years? Man, I can't wait to get in there and kill all those giants. Well, guess what? When they get into the promised land, what is Caleb doing? He's only going after the giants. He goes straight to the giants. He's not dealing with the horses and chariots. He's doing with the scariest of them all, and he kills them all, and he defeats them all. He defeats them so bad that they have to hide away in what we find later in the book of Samuel in Philistia. They're completely removed out of Canaan until the Philistines come back and Israel gets weak in the knees. But he is the great giant killer in the Old Testament. David killed one, and they killed a couple of his brothers, but Caleb's killing hundreds of them. And he's hungry for it, He's ready. You can understand why. Like I said, 40 years wandering around with that group of people in particular. And, you were the one that came with a good report. You're ready to go in there. And then the rest of them you're just constantly complaining, You'd be ready too if you had a mind, right? Well, he was a Kenizzite. Remember, Caleb is not. This is important. Caleb is not an Israelite according to the seed. Right? He is a Kenizzite, meaning he's outside of Israel. The Kenizzites are incorporated into the tribe of Judah. So that means what? By this point in time, David and Nabal are kinsmen. They're of the same tribe. So this continues the theme that we've been seeing for the past couple weeks of the tribe of Benjamin being an honorable tribe with a dishonorable king, and the tribe of Judah being a tribe with an honorable king, but they are themselves dishonorable. We cannot find a passage here in 1 Samuel. We'll eventually get there. Eventually Judah will get its act together. But we cannot find a passage here in 1 Samuel where the Judahites are actually good, are friendly towards their king. So he should be honored according to the familial name. But there is a great declension of virtue. Now, this is an important point I want to make. All right? This is an important point I want to make, that just because you come from a noble stock, a good seed, and which in here I doubt none, all right? I'm sure you're all good from, I have to say so for my own brother, because we share the same stock, right? I'm sure we all come from great stock. And perhaps if we think great of ourselves, we would think that our own children will be of that same great stock, correct? But that's not quite how it works. For each son must be raised in the fear and admonition of the Lord. Each daughter must be raised in the fear and admonition of the Lord. All of our children must be raised in that manner. This is why we believe, by the way, here as a church, that the children should be in the sanctuary as much as the parents are able to keep them here. I was speaking with Sister Anna this morning about it. I said, I have no issues with them, proclaiming the Lord with their loud voices in the services. It's trying to convince the parents that it's okay, But no, we should all have a smile on our face when we hear the voice of children and the cries of children, not in a sort of sadistic way, but in the way that they're here, they're present, they're amongst us, and God's voice is being heard. So it says in the Psalms, out of the mouth of babes is the strength of the Lord declared. But if we remove them from our services, and if we remove them from seeing us, their parents, in worship, is it any surprise that when we find those studies that they do, Ligonier and Barnum and the others do every year, and they do the study on the statistics of children and the church and college age, and what do they all uniformly show? They leave the church the second they get out of high school. What are they all almost in agreement? What's the correlation there? They never saw their parents in worship. They came to church. They were segregated from their parents. And then they went home and their parents probably... And hey, look, I get it. I'm also, I try to be my holiest here. As you probably try to be your holiest here. And so when you leave and you get in your car, and I'm not excusing it, we got to be holy all the time. But it's understandable. We're in a particular kind of presence where we are working our absolute hardest, where we don't have worldly affections getting in our way, like obnoxious drivers who won't go the speed limit or are cutting in front of you, all right? And now you have to be holy in the midst of that. And that's what your children see. But they never see you worshiping. And that's trouble. And this is what leads to a Nabal. A guy who is descended from a seed of giant killers, stock of great noble men, ruined by greedy and a repulsive nature. And by repulsive, I don't mean they're ugly, but I mean literally repulsive. He pushes away. So the call is then to you fathers. Right? Looking at you, looking at you. And future fathers too. Spiritual fathers too. That we raise our seed after the noble stock of our fathers. That they know that they come from giant killers. That they know, and not just Caleb, they come from the greatest if they are in Christ. They come from the greatest of giant killers. The one who slew that great Leviathan. Who slew death, which no man could harm with a sword. Who slew sin. Those giants, they come from that. And there's so many of these Christians, so-called, that leave the church. And then you discuss with them what their view of Jesus is, who Jesus is. They haven't a clue. They haven't a clue. We'll talk a little bit more about that in this evening service, so I'll wait on that. There's also a play on words here, probably, in that he is called a Calebite, and which both the I can't remember the other text, so I apologize, but the Greek Septuagint does not actually render it as Calebite. I think we should. I think it should be understood as Calebite, but there's reason why the Greek Septuagint doesn't do it, and that's because there is a play on words here. Caleb, in English, K-E-L-E-B, is the word for dog. Right? And so Caleb is a dog, and he is connected to a dog. He's churlish here in this passage, so there is a play on words there. The Greek Septuagint goes a step further, I believe, and says that that's just all it's referring to, but I think that he is actually a Calebite. It's just a play on words. Well, he has a counterpart, doesn't he? And she's complete opposite of him. There's Nabal, who's the foolish man, but he has a wife who is named Abigail. And she is a woman who was good in insight and beautiful in appearance. What does this make Abigail? Well, first of all, Abigail means joy of her father. That's an important name in the book of Samuel, isn't it? I want to keep bringing this up as we pay attention to the themes of Samuel, which is about what? Fathers and sons. Right? That is the continued theme throughout the book, and it's actually chiastically structured in that way. We start out with faithful sons, faithless fathers. We move towards the center of the book, right? And we've got faithless father, faithful son, and then David becomes the faithful father, and we end off with faithless sons, right? Like Absalom. So that's how it's chiastically structured that way. So Abigail, she's on the good team, right? Because we can say it right away from her name. She is the joy of her father. Unfortunately, she seemed not so much to be actually the joy of her father, despite that name, because her father married her off to Nabal, right? She is wise. She is a true wealth. But foolish fathers and husbands choose material wealth over wise daughters, unfortunately. And so, if you have daughters, now at present I can only speak to one person in the room, right? If you have daughters, do not be a foolish father. Do not hand her over for material wealth. Do not give her over for material wealth, but let her be married to the wise, even as she is to be raised wisely and in wisdom. She is basically the female David, if you notice the language here. She is a woman that was good in insight and beautiful in appearance. You know, those are the exact same words minus woman that was said of David back in chapter 16. That he had insight and that he was beautiful, ruddy of appearance. So, she is the female David. Sorry, I said 16, I meant chapter 18. As I said before, she is wise and a true wealth, and this is what we should seek rather than worldly wealth, especially when we seek our spouses, female spouses, to the men in particular. You are looking, right, for a jewel, a precious thing, not for a precious thing of the external, that which, a kind of, you can go to the store, right, and get a ring, and it looks very pretty, but it's only being sold for 15 cents because it's just got a painted color on it, and it's just, plastic or steel. But you want the true, precious material, that thing which, when fire burns away all the dross, it remains truly precious. That is wealth. A wife is a gift from God. Who can find such a thing? Who can find such a thing? Well, here Nabal has somehow stumbled his way into it, right? By some gracious providence. And yet, despite this, being such a fool as he is, he does not take on the wisdom of Abigail. And we will actually see that expressly in our passage next week, in which Abigail takes on the picture of Jacob. She's the one that comes out with the gift and turns away the wrath of David with his 400 men like Esau. Right? She does that, and she tries to counsel her husband, don't be stupid, you're literally going up against the next king of Israel with 400 men, and we have no defense whatsoever. Bah humbug, right? Really foolish man. Well, we read in verse 4 that David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. David helps shear these sheep in some capacity. We don't actually see that until the shepherds of Nabal actually confess that about David. David is very humble and does not even mention it. We'll read that now, verses 5 through 8. David's parle. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go up to Carmel, come to Nabal, and greet him in my name. And thus you shall say, have a long life, peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. So now I have heard that you have shears. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we have not dishonored them, nor have they missed anything all the days they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we have come on a festive day. Please give whatever you find at hand to your servants and to your son, to David. So the request is to go to a festival, a feast. So he's seeking what? A communion meal, right? He's seeking a communion meal with the ruler, and he greets in his name. He wants them to greet in his name. What does that mean? David, Prince of Israel, son of Saul, all right? Future king. Just 5 minutes ago, Saul said that David was going to be the next king, all right? Greet in that name. If the president sends a servant to you, and he says, I'm coming to your house, what are you as a Christian supposed to do? Right? Because we may not like who's in the office. Right? But if the servant of the president comes to your house and says, he is coming to eat with you, whatever you have. He doesn't expect a fancy dinner or anything. Whatever you've got, in the house. If it's just a box of Cheez-Its, that's all he'll eat with you. What are you supposed to do? Break out the box of Cheez-Its, get the nice china and put it in there, right? Even if it looks silly. But you're going to eat with the president. You're going to eat with the leader of your nation. You're going to give him that honor. That's the expectation, right? Now, note, however, he gives him this name, and so we might say, oh, well, that's David being proud. No, it's not, because in giving this great title, he might request everything of Nabal, right? As a tyrant, he could request everything. But he doesn't even request, he just requests the bare minimum, we'll put it that way. The bare minimum. Whatever you've got on hand. I'm not even asking, I'm asking, what he's asking for is the excess. Whatever's left over. Right? We can think of this. It seems not to be the same thing as we read of in Leviticus of the law, which says you're supposed to leave the outer limits for the poor to come and receive for themselves. This seems to be of the principle, though, from the same principle, because it is some kind of festival, and we read of it later in 2 Samuel as it relates to Absalom and his hair, and there's a feast that's had. So there is some kind of festival. It doesn't seem to be a law festival, but rather out of principle of the law kind of festival. And so there's this expectation that you're going to give. What is David then saying? I am king, but I am coming to you as a beggar. I'm coming to you as a beggar. So it is a humble request, whatever is on hand. David does not appeal to royal office to gorge himself. Oh, that we would have such men today in office that do not seek to make themselves fat, and in many cases literally fat, in their thrones, off of eating our food. And not our excess food, but of our own hands, of our own labor, our own fruits, which ought to be on our own family tables. That is what they ought not to be eating of, but are eating of. Notice how he says there at the end, to your servants and to your son, to David, your son, David. David here is acting as a son to Nabal, again continuing to mirror that relationship between Saul and David, and now David and Nabal, we might say between Nabal and Saul. So we have a good son again, and again, a rotten father. A rotten father. What does Jesus say, right? A father gives good gifts. Right? Right? When we ask for bread, we don't expect that our Father in heaven gives us a stone. When we ask for fish, we don't expect them to give us a scorpion. Right? David says to Nabal, can I have a little bit of bread? And he gives him a stone and a scorpion in response. He is a rotten father. He is not a good father. So let us continue on then, verses 9 through 13. Then David's young men came and spoke to Nabal according to all these words in David's name. Then they waited. But Nabal answered David's servants and said, who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are each breaking away from his master. Now notice the pronouns, okay? You ready for the pronouns here? Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men whose origin I do not know? You can almost hear the whininess in his voice, right? Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? We've heard that before, haven't we? We've heard that with Saul, right? Who is David? Who are these men then to Nabal? These are runaway slaves. These are nothing more than fugitives. He must not have gotten the memo that Samuel died. Of course he did, so he shouldn't be treating them like this, but he is anyways. The Philistines know David better, don't they? Hey, isn't that the king of Israel? Isn't that the one who's killed, Saul's killed his hundreds, David's killed his thousands? Isn't that him? They know. The king of Israel, they know David better than his own kinsman. His own supposed kinsman. What is the cause of this sourness? What is the cause of this bitterness, this ugliness? It is covetousness, beloved. Covetousness is a grave sin. It is the sin which, you'll note, the young rich ruler doesn't mention. Right? That Jesus draws out of him. Oh, I've kept all these laws. And he starts going through the laws and he doesn't mention covetousness. Why doesn't he mention covetousness? Because it's in the heart. Everything else in the Ten Commandments, yes, there are heart applications as Jesus demonstrates, but as they are explicitly written, they're all outward, right? Adultery, murder, theft, you physically do something, but covetousness is strictly in the heart. The 10th commandment is strictly in the heart. So Jesus says, go and sell all your possessions and then you can come follow me. And what does the young rich ruler do? He goes away despairing. Because he had not actually kept the law. Because he who breaks one of the commandments breaks all the commandments, right? Covetousness was deeply rooted in his heart. And so out of that comes bitterness. Out of that comes sourness. Why? Because covetousness is in the place of love. Where there is no love, there is hatred. There's disdain, there is disgust. And so even this man, this prince, is treated as if he were the poor man. Well, beloved, we're not even called necessarily, obviously we respect all persons according to their office, but the call of the Christian is not even to make such a pomp and effort for the prince, but for the poor man, the truly beggared man, to care for them. And we have, both our church and myself personally at other churches, have dealt with the poor, and we have helped them. And some we've had good stories to report on. And for others, we do not. We can never let those bad stories dictate how we are going to treat any other of the poor. They're all their own person. They're on their own blank slate, as it were, for us to care for, to love, to support, to heal, to feed, to clothe, to give drink. So it says in Hebrews, how do you know if you're serving an angel or not? Now they come in with all kinds of blasphemies and swearing. That's probably a good guess they're not an angel. If they are an angel, they're not a good one, all right? But that does not mean we turn them necessarily away. He's accusatory to it. Yeah, that's right. Nabal's the bad guy. That's correct. He's accusatory towards David. His evil has led to his distress. Again, I'm bringing this up to ourselves. How many times do we look to the poor before we know a thing about them, and perhaps our first thought is this: his decisions led him there. Now that may be true, but is that our call to make that judgment call? No. Our judgment call, and the first is to care, to meet the needs of the poor. Now, if along the way we begin to see that their own evil led them to their distress, we might assist them in that, right? That's right. We assist them in it. We do. Now, they have to be open to that assistance. Again, this is something we have learned. They have to be open to that assistance, or there's very little we can do. But notice Nabal, and this is what I'm saying for us to avoid. Notice Nabal's disposition. It's immediately to assume evil, and therefore not to help. All right, this is sort of the kind of thing that we may make a prudent decision. We see the poor on the side of the street, we choose not to give them raw cash, because we might be thinking that's going to some kind of alcohol or drugs. But that should not stop us from getting them food, from drink, from blankets, for clothing. All these things are good. I'd be surprised and I'd be very distressed if I found out that they're bartering blankets for drugs. So hopefully that's not the case. Our hearts are not meant to be accusatory in nature, but gracious. Gracious, as God is gracious towards us. As I mentioned before, the first person pronouns there, Nabal has 8 of them for himself. All right? I'm not going to go too deep into this thought, but I'll at least plant it in your mind. 8 is the number of Christ. So if you're putting 8 to yourself, that's not good. That's a selfish and ambitious man, a grossly ambitious man. And it is worthwhile noting, our riches are not our own, but given to us to steward. So it is not, in fact, to Nabal, I'll say, it is not your bread, it is not your water, it is not your meat, it is not you who have slaughtered, and they're not your shearers. And it is not according to your knowledge. But it is God's bread, it is God's water, it is God's meat, it is God's slaughter, it is God's shearers, and so on and so forth. They belong to God, and we administer that which is given to us. And so Nabal, I told you this passage has got all kinds of typology in it, right? So don't be thrown in for too much of a whiplash here, because we've been talking about Laban and the like. But now I'm bringing us back to Exodus, because we've been in David's Exodus moment, haven't we? Nabal is as the Edomite, the Ammonite, and the Moabite. What are they known for? Well, you're not supposed to make friends with them, right? Why aren't you supposed to make friends with the Ammonites and Moabites? And why aren't they allowed in the sanctuary unless 10 generations pass? Which, by the way, David is the 10th generation from Ruth, the Moabitess, so that he is clean to enter. All right. So when we say grandma and grandpa, we don't mean immediately grandma and grandpa. Kind of in the same way that when we say Belshazzar and Daniel is the son of Nebuchadnezzar, we don't mean the direct son. He's actually the grandson. Midio-Shach is in between them. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 3 through 6 tell us why you're not supposed to associate with them. No Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of Yahweh, even to the 10th generation. None of their seed shall ever enter the assembly of Yahweh, because they did not meet you with bread and water on the way when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam, the son of Beor, from Pethor of Mesopotamia, to curse you. All right, yes, you have Balaam there mentioned. All right, that's a significant thing. But what precedes that? They did not come out to meet you with bread and water. So it is that Nabal is outside the assembly of God. He's making himself outside the assembly of God, isn't he? He's not aligning himself with the beloved. He's not aligning himself with the Messiah figure. And so he is outside the assembly of God. Well, what does David do? All right, guys, pick up your swords. He takes 400 men with him. This is where we might have expected the continuation of Jacob. Or maybe he just runs or that sort of thing. He sort of gets over it. He gets away. Somehow he ends up with 2 wives or something. Maybe that's what we'd expect. No. Instead, he turns into Esau and his 400 men who come out to meet Jacob. Now he is going to avenge himself. What happened here? We've continually been reading about David as being this patient, waiting, I'm not going to touch the Lord's anointed. What happened? I think the answer is given to us in that hinge I told you about. Verse 1. Why is Samuel's death recorded where it is? Because it's for this passage as much as it was for last week's chapter. The restraint of Samuel is gone. David is on his own. Now he is being tempted. A new fall is set before him. He must overcome it. But without Samuel, without that fatherly figure, passion is going to overtake patience in affliction. Now, I want that message to hit and resonate with us each as individuals, but also as parents, those of us who are parents. First, as individuals, when we are in affliction, we cannot allow that affliction, and therefore the lack of restraint in it, to allow for our passions to overtake us. Our emotions to overtake us. Because what do trials do? They pressure us, don't they? They frustrate us. They give us great amount of sorrow. For some of us, it's despair. For some of us, it is anxiety and depression. For some of us, it's fear. For some of us, it's wrath. And now I turn that to our parents, right? What does the scriptures say? Do not provoke your children to anger. Right? Do not deal with them in wrath. That's real hard sometimes when they're punching you in the face, and grabbing your glasses, throwing it across the room. I've seen that once or twice, I know I would be struggling if my glasses got taken off and thrown across the room. As it becomes hard when it's, there, right? When you're reading it, it's real easy to say, oh, yes, that's easy. I'm reading it. But then when the child's right there in front of you and really thumbing their nose at you, now it's hard. Now the trial and the pressure on. Don't let the passions overtake you. Don't let them overcome you. There's righteous anger, so don't, this is not me saying, if you ever spank your child, you're not a Christian. That's not what I'm saying. There's time for punishment, there's time for discipline, all those things. But don't let it be out of passion. Be it out of discipline. In yourself, be disciplined before you start disciplining your children. See that David, in a sense, is actually a harsher Gideon. Gideon does something similar here in chapter 8. After all the successes and whatnot, we read in chapter 8, verses 13 through 17, those who denied him food, he punishes. Then Gideon, the son of Joash, returned from battle by the ascent of Heres. And he captured a youth from the men of Succoth and questioned him. So the youth wrote down for him the princes of Succoth and its elders, 77 men. Then he came to the men of Succoth and said, Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you reproached me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are weary? Then he took the elders of the city, as well as thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth a lesson. That's a funny phrase to find in our Bible, right? He taught them a lesson. And he tore down the tower of Penuel and killed the men of the city. Now he taught them a lesson. Now there's a harsher bit at Penuel, and that's for another reason. But David is already going straight to let's kill them. He's going straight to my honor has been attacked. Now I'm going to avenge my honor. The passions are overcoming him. Well, let us conclude our passage, verses 14 through 17, where it says, But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, Behold, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he rushed at them angrily. I'm like, well. Yet the men were very good to us, and we were not dishonored, nor did we miss anything, as long as we went about with them, while we were in the field. They were a wall to us both by night and by day, all the time we were with them, shepherding the sheep. So now know and see what you should do, for evil is decided against our master, and against all his household, and he is such a vile man that no one can speak to him. The word there, vile, is he is a son of Belial. So we read that David's men protected Nabal from the Philistine attack on the threshing floors that we read of a couple chapters ago, right? So Nabal would be financially ruined if it wasn't for David. And yet still, he's covetous, greedy, wicked, and evil. Well, the servants appeal to the wife, the woman. Is that appropriate? Should they? Right? Because I know in this room we got a lot of biblical patriarchists. That's okay, I am too. But guess what? The wife is the lesser magistrate. In the same manner that your county commissioners are your lesser magistrate to the governor. In the same manner that your governor is the lesser magistrate to the president. In these manners, the lesser magistrate is called explicitly and expressly by God to stand in the gap when a higher authority is acting in tyranny. Okay? There does come a time. And what is the wife? She is the queen of the household. Who are the servants? They're of the household, right? We read of them in the household codes, right? The law that Paul gives in Colossians and Ephesians, who are included in the households. Well, we've got wives, we've got husbands, we've got children. All right, we've got the whole household. Oh, no, there's masters, there's slaves. That's the household. All right? So they're part of the household. So they're going to the lesser magistrate, the queen of the household. And they're appealing to her The lesser magistrate for protection and intercession. And by the way, then, women and mothers, wives, you actually have a responsibility as a lesser magistrate. You have a responsibility as a lesser magistrate to protect the innocent from tyranny. You have a responsibility towards that. This does not mean any kind of usurpation. Right? You do not usurp the role. You do not usurp the office of husband, father, king, or whatever else. You do not usurp that, but you stand in the way. You stand in the way when death and tyranny come. You stand in the way. You protect. You don't take over. All right? I hope we're hearing that correctly. You're not taking over the office. You're protecting from the office. Okay? There's a difference between the two. All right, we're going to end there. It might feel like a weird place to end, but that's where our passage ends, so that's where we're ending. So here are some applications. 1, be not like Nabal. Avoid the covetousness of man that leads to foolishness and vanity. All right, I actually did have one more point, and I forgot it. Beliar, son of Beliar, son of Belial, it means useless one, vile one, vain one. Elsewhere, it might be translated, and worthily translated, worthless one. Right? He's a cynical dog. That's the meaning of it for Nabal. He's a cynical dog. So, back to the application. Avoid the covetousness, like Nabal had in his heart, that leads to foolishness, being called Nabal. Imagine your parents calling you a fool as your actual name, right? And vanity. And vanity. Right? Uselessness. Worthlessness. Nabal is a worthless man. I know that can sound very harsh, right? In our culture today and whatnot, and maybe even as Christians, the 11th commandment, you shall be nice. But no, there are people who are worthless, like Nabal. It doesn't mean they have to maintain that worthless status, okay? I'm not saying, they're worthless, therefore treat them with indignity. That's not what I'm saying. But they are themselves worthless. They need to come out of that. They need to not be that. And so the application also extends on that parental level. Do not raise foolish and worthless children, but raise instead Abigails, the joys of fathers, those who are insightful and beautiful. Second, pursue wisdom over material riches that lead to exile. Nabal is in exile in his own land because he has removed himself out of the assembly of God by not giving bread and water to the beloved David. But if he pursues wisdom, if he pursues the wisdom even found in his own wife that God has graciously given him, then he might. Of course he doesn't, so don't do that. Don't be like Nabal. If I can quote Jesus, but change the word just so slightly, remember Nabal. It's a quote of remember Lot's wife, right? Who in a sense is in the same type, isn't she? Her covetousness made her look back at the things and turned into a pillar of salt. Lastly, be cautious of passions when old restraints are removed. It's especially true of children. It's especially true. All right, Frankie, so listen up. Listen to this one. When you're grown and old and you leave out of your parents' house and the old restraints are removed, I'll put it this way. All right? And this is not unique to me. Someone else said this to me. All right? If you want to make sure that when they're in the car and they're not alone with their shirts off, you have to be sure that they know the Psalms before they even get to that point. That's right. You don't want to do that. But the Psalms will keep you. All right? They had better know the 10 Commandments. That's why we recite it every single week. They had better know those 10 Commandments. So that when they come up to that situation, they know what the law says. They know what the 6th and 7th Commandments say before they engage. All right? All right, well, our service is a little different today, you might have noticed. And so, we're going to do the Lord's Supper. We're going to sing the song after we do the Lord's Supper. So, what I'm going to do now, at this moment, at present, is a very, very short devotion based upon our passage in relation to the supper. Because we had a feast, didn't we? And Nabal should have been a gracious father to open up his table, but he was not. But beloved, we have a gracious Father this morning. We have a gracious Lord who invites us to his table, to eat of his bread, to drink of his blood. We eat of him, we drink of him, and he is truly present with us as we do so. We reject the view of the Catholics, the view of the Eastern Orthodox, the view even of the Lutherans about how that mystery works. For we believe that we eat of him in faith, and we do not re-sacrifice him, but his sacrifice, we eat of the resurrected body, not of the pre-resurrected body, not of the crucified body, but of the crucified and resurrected body of Christ in faith. He invites us to that table with joy. With joy. Have a sense of graveness as it relates in reverence to our God, but have joy about you as you come to this table. Don't come up all sad. The table is not for sentiment, beloved. Doesn't Jesus say as much even to those who are mourning for him as he's going to the cross? Don't weep for me, weep for yourselves. This is not a lamentable thing. This is a joyous thing that is happening. So it is said in the scripture, it pleased the Father to bruise him. Right? So, pray. When you are ready, come, and I shall present the elements to you.